Growing up in the 2000s curated a very broad taste in animation. 2005 was an especially rough year because, well, let's just say the visual choices for new animated features were certainly different. And look, I know everyone's kind of back on the new anti-Disney wagon that seemed to be a thing when the Shrek franchise was blowing up, but you have to understand that it didn't matter what studio made the movie. If you were watching animation at the turn of the millennium, you were getting some pristine shit. Not that any of them were financially successful, but from Disney you had Atlantis, Lilo and Stitch, Brother Bear, and Treasure Planet, the latter of which has since become one of my favorite movies of all time. And from DreamWorks, you had the likes of Road to El Dorado and Sinbad. Again, these were sweeping, action-oriented, blockbuster-style movies with no singing and very, very smooth animation. You get my point though. I really liked it when I was younger, and the specific cluster of movies, plus a few more, laid the groundwork for that appreciation. As I already stated, the years following these releases were a rough patch for animation from multiple studios, not just Disney. And it seemed no one was interested in the medium as they used to be, so it took a while for the production companies to find footing. Digging a little deeper, with the explosion of social media came an almost vindictive rear view of childhood films rather than appreciation, at least in my environment. If I had a nickel for every time in school someone brought up subliminal images in The Lion King, or Belle from Beauty and the Beast having Stockholm Syndrome, I would have had 30 or 40 bucks. In 2010, Disney released another little animated film called Tangled, featuring a bright-eyed princess protagonist, her animal sidekick, and, slightly to my chagrin, Broadway-style songs. Again, I was a teenager, so I have to admit my guttural reaction might have been dismissive. This was a kid's movie, and even more so, it was a princess movie, which I never really cared about, and there hadn't been that many in the early 2000s anyway. Ultimately, we would rent Tangled and watch it because it was a safe, approachable option for my parents, and there was a good amount of humor in it. This coincided with one of the biggest changes in my life, switching from homeschooling, which I'd been doing since kindergarten, to attend a real high school with other people my age in it. I don't want to reveal too much personal information, but this info is essential to understanding the point of this video. Firstly, I was raised in a very religious household under a very specific branch of Christianity. The pillars of this sect were very strict and traditional, to the point some kids even asked if I was Amish. In hindsight, I've realized that many of the traditional aspects of our lifestyle might have been a covert attempt to penny pinch. No video games, cable television, or anything of that sort. We lived out in the country, lived simply in an attempt to stay humble in what seemed to be a highly materialistic world, all for the glory of God. Let me start by saying that even with all of these strict rules and regulations and the constant fear of a hellfire afterlife for the slightest sin hanging over me, I still had fun and a mostly carefree childhood. In recent years, I've even come to appreciate certain aspects of being raised on the periphery of the zeitgeist and the subsequent openness I feel it taught me. But still, there were many parts of it that were also isolating, creating a sense of otherness that has been hard to ignore even after growing up and integrating into modern society. At this point, you can probably understand what parallels I'm going to be drawing to something as innocent and highly fictional as Tangled. The idea of a protagonist being sheltered from a world where she thinks she can live freely is nothing new. The Little Mermaid, for instance, infamously has a main character desiring to move beyond her little water world and be with people, land people. Ariel, however, is a little harder to connect with because the world she lives in doesn't feel isolating. It's only her father who's really causing the issues. She has Sebastian, her sisters, her little collection, so it's still very much a broad world. The problem is she doesn't identify with it. Of course, almost every character in the Disney Renaissance had their little I Want song. If you don't know what that is, just look it up. But having an I Want moment can come in multiple different forms, some a little too specific to, again, fully identify with. In Tangled's case, Rapunzel is actively removed from the world she could have grown up in and kept away in a tower, raised by Mother Gothel to believe in her soul that the outside world is dangerous. Typically, of course, she matures. Rapunzel grows an interest in the world outside. Her song at the beginning was an almost perfect representation of what it felt like to be stuck at home every single day while beginning to mature and perceive the world of normal people around me. Yes, the subject of her I Want moment is kind of focused on the lanterns, but that's more of a hook, representing the world outside of the tower. One quick thing I should stress before I go further is that Mother Gothel is a psychotic villain who wants to keep Rapunzel for the magic effect of her hair. My parents were in no way siphoning my energy or even keeping me and my siblings against our will. Rather, they were just very dedicated to their religious beliefs, and that's just how life goes sometimes. If you listen to Mother Knows Best, I'd argue it and Mother Gothel herself represent more of what the traditional ideals of Christianity considered the world to be like at the time. The slightest straying from God's path would result in disastrous consequences. Sin was abundant in places like public school, according to them, so stay separate from the world and it'll be easier to follow God's designated path for you, that kind of thing. Anyway, moving on. We have Flynn Rider. Nope, we have a sneeze. Jesus.
Gesundheit.
Anyways, moving on, we have Flynn Rider. Probably the part of the film that is not as much of a parallel to homeschool life, because rarely are you going to find that a specific person will appear out of nowhere to act as a catalyst for your subsequent integration into the real world. In my personal case, homeschool was a thing that just didn't work out because it wasn't intensive enough. I was struggling with algebra, and it turns out some kids can't just be put in front of a textbook and learn complicated algorithms all by themselves. I would have definitely liked to have been one of those kids, but alas, I wasn't, and as my freshman year came to an end, it was decided I would have to attend not homeschool in order to graduate. So that's what happened, and much like the subsequent scenes of Rapunzel leaving the tower with Flynn, my time in high school with other kids my age was equally chaotic. The scene where she sings the second reprise of When Will My Life Begin after experiencing nature outside the tower is one of my favorites, and while something like a high school is nowhere near as magical as touching grass for the first time, I'm assuming, there's still an internal sense of elation at being around other people and seeing different ways of life and perspectives. Now, thanks to my specific geographical location, there was still quite a bit of evangelical Christianity to go around, and there was still an aspect of it that felt unrestrictive. To these kids, it wasn't this nearly monkish way of life, but rather an aesthetic addition to life in the Bible Belt. Come to find out, that's how it is for a majority of people. So the scene with the tavern comes up next, and the I've Got a Dream song plays out. The parallels of leaving a strict homeschool situation continue with the scene representing the pivotal realization that people out in the world might look scary, and there are indeed very dangerous people that exist. But the majority of the regular Joes who are going to school or work are just living their lives and chasing their dreams. In fact, something I love even more about this part is how Rapunzel uses her own experience of leaving the tower as something to share with the scary tavern guys, helping them remember their own dreams in the process. It's inspiring and healing, and many of the emotions exhibited in this particular scene mimicked what I experienced in real life following the exodus into public education and continuing into college. As is customary for these kinds of stories, though, there's always a setback. Tangled really digs into it, though, letting Rapunzel experience the kingdom and the lanterns and even showcasing her blossoming love for Flynn. But then, Mother Gothel comes back. In a strict Protestant-like setting, it's easy to paint the world as dangerous and sinful because, by all accounts, it can be. There's no way to deny that. And especially for impressionable young adults experiencing the world in their newfound maturity, things are bound to happen, and they won't always be the most positive experiences. Once I started to live my own life in college, there were instances that arose that I've regretted. Things like substance abuse and giving into apathetic behavioral patterns, especially to people who struggle with the effects of faith-based background, can be big and serious things. Luckily for me, once I was out of the strict religious setting and living my own life, there was little anyone could do to draw me back, but the tug was there. Struggling to find a positive relationship, steady friendship, or good work all brought on feelings one is warned about when you aren't living the life God chose for you. But I kept pushing. I stuck to my gut despite the setbacks, and eventually, life evened out as much as it could. There are always going to be bad times, and learning to accept that and still find the beauty in life is what really makes existing worth it. At the climax of Tangled, Rapunzel has returned to Mother Gothel's tower, and Flynn has escaped confinement in the palace to get to her. He's attacked and mortally wounded by Mother Gothel, but Rapunzel begs to spare his life using her magic hair. This is where things get a little more serious. In an act of selflessness, Flynn uses a glass shard to cut Rapunzel's magic hair, knowing that with it severed, she will no longer be under Mother Gothel's control. The scene is dramatic, and so many things happen all at once. Flynn has essentially sacrificed himself to free his love. Rapunzel is finally spared from Mother Gothel's imprisonment, and the villain herself succumbs to her true nature, becoming dust in the wind. In reality, the true separation from a life you grew up believing to be the ultimate universal truth can be difficult. Much like Rapunzel's hair, a strict religious upbringing apart from the world at large can create nearly unscalable walls around oneself, and finally letting something like that go can feel impossible. Yes, maybe that's a little dramatic, but the mentality that can be cultivated by that kind of background can be very, very influential on one's outlook on life. But thanks to our life's journeys, our experiences, and having new and open-minded people around us, cutting those ties really can be possible. And even though the process might be painful, you are still free in the end. The blanket, that safety, that thing you had that answered all of life's questions is gone. And it's scary to experience on your own. But again, it's possible. And ultimately, it's good. Just like in Tangled, if Rapunzel had never stepped out of her tower and gone on her journey, she would have never ended up where she belonged with the people she deserved to be with. Grace Potter's song, Something That I Want, in its essence, is a simple recap of Tangled's story with a catchy hook. Still, the verses in the chorus hold simple little gems that help remind me of life. I've matured and removed myself from what could have been a life of negativity. There are people I've met in recent years in the same situation, a strict religious upbringing and the struggle of living a simple, normal life. And I have to admit, I'm very lucky to be at the place I am personally. Some people get affected even worse than I have, to the point there's still a lot of bitterness and inability to live with oneself as they are. But it's a process, a complicated one, and different people have different levels they have to reach at different times. All part of the process. The song says, he's been living in a pure illusion. She's gonna come to her own conclusion. Right when you think you know what to say, someone comes along and shows you a brand new way. Various religions and their concurrent lifestyles seek to be an answer to the questions arisen by the universe. And when you cut yourself off from that, all of the insane questions about life flood your psyche again. Only this time, the answers come when they're meant to. At the end of Tangled, Rapunzel doesn't have her magic hair anymore, the answer to many of her problems in her past life. But that doesn't mean she has to face the future with fear. She has to approach it the way we all do, just one day at a time.